Hey, we're Matt and Julie Beamer with Jonathan and Elizabeth Beamer, and we are celebrating 30 years of living and ministering overseas. And to do that, we're going to be sharing stories both today, Club 1040 Day, and throughout the year coming. We'll be dropping different stories, different podcasts, and things like that to show you how your investment in Club 1040 is making an impact throughout the Middle East and North Africa, and to talk about how by the year 2030, we want to see that impact expand and continue in a strong and more quick way. So make sure you don't miss out, and also help us out by sharing these with your friends as well. Spread the word, because the more we get this word out, the more we can do, the more quickly we can do it together. God bless. Yeah, so we'd been to Nigeria one time, and in that, we found out that the Bible college founder that we came, the Bible college we came from, Kenneth Hagin, Rhema, he had this incredible influence on the country that not even he knew about. So I kind of reported that back to some of the leadership at Rhema, and at the same time, there was a seed of something that began to grow in us, and then it got to the point where like, okay, now we're supposed to move to Nigeria, but how do you do that? So we turned over the church in England in 2008, and we began the process of relocating. And in that process, we knew we needed to raise support. That was a big component of it. That's where we did the 80 days around the USA, where instead of homeschool, you did on-the-road school. What was that like, doing homeschool in the car?
It was so jam-packed in there every single day. Not only did we have suitcases, but we had the whole table set up, all the Bible school books. Like, we had so much in there.
We did, yeah. And we literally, we went from kind of Oklahoma, where we got the vehicle. It was a Nissan Armada that was packed with stuff. And the idea is we bought it. I think it was used, but we bought it with, I think we owed maybe $16,000 on it or something. And the hope was it would be paid off by the time we finished, so that we could put it on the container and ship it over with all the other things we needed to ship over. And we were like, we don't know where we're going to live. In the time that we had been in Nigeria for the 3 months, when we'd stayed there, and we talked about the Christmas and all that kind of stuff that we did, that the goal of that is to kind of fact find, get on the ground, pray, figure it out. And in that time, we had met somebody named Tokes. We had I met weekly with these guys, and I asked them questions like, what should it look like here? What, that kind of thing. You looked at the school. They said that, they could give you a job, which would help to pay for the tuition, that kind of a thing. And so accommodation we didn't have. It was transportation, accommodation, education. Yeah, the Lord told us when we moved from England, you'll never have to give thought about accommodation, education, or transportation.
He said Nigeria will provide for Nigeria.
Yeah.
And that was so good to know.
Yeah, so, but we still had to do the natural side. So that meant, traveling around, telling people about the vision, begin to raise support, that kind of a thing. And a cool thing happened with the car. By the time we got to California, actually in California, a couple of things. We were staying with some of our board members, Jason and Peggy Younger, and they were letting us sleep on the floor there. We were all kind of camped out with them and their family for about 3 weeks, meeting different people in the area. And while we were having our board meeting out in the area, someone from a church in Arkansas had put a blank check in for the mission vehicle to be paid off. And so that we found out that, and it was like, fantastic. So that was paid off. And then it was like, the next thing was, what about accommodation? How in the world are we going to get any accommodation? After all these 80 days, we maybe had like $5,000 in the bank. We hadn't really done a very good job of raising a bunch of money.
Well, that could sound like a lot to people, but to move your whole life, your whole family, all the way to a different country, like that, it takes a lot of money.
And the baseline of a container, if you just give a quick, how much does it take to ship a container of stuff over to a third world country?
It was going to cost, the container itself cost about $4,500, and then it cost another $6,000 to $10,000 depending on where you're shipping it, for fees and that for the actual shipping part. So like $10,000 to $15,000. Then you have to pay for the stuff to go inside the container. Yeah. But that wasn't even the issue. The issue was to find a place there. Everywhere we had looked when we visited for those 3 months, like you said, the American school principal allowed us to stay over the Christmas holidays while they were out of the country in their place for free,
Yeah.
which was a huge blessing because it cost something like to stay in that same house would have cost something like $100,000 a year to rent that same house. And I remember you visited that one lady's apartment.
We always thought and heard, if you go to Africa, you'll be like living like a king. We got over there
Yeah, that
and we
it's
were
cheap,
like,
you know?
oh my gosh, this is the most expensive place that we could ever imagine. But whenever we were visiting there, I got to go to this lady took me for lunch to go look at this lady's apartment just to visit her and to say hi. And when I went over there, I was like, I can totally live in this place. It just seemed like it fit. And it was in a compound. It was safe. There was a swimming pool for you kids to be at. It felt like a place that we could live. And so I went back and I told Matt, I said, Matt, I could live in that place.
Yeah, because up to that point, we were thinking we needed a house. And, because we were coming from England, we were just thinking that way. I hadn't even thought about an apartment. Like, okay, yeah, that's good. And so anyway, fast forward 3-4 months later, we're out for a walk in California, and your mom says to me, Julie says to me, where are we going to live? And I'm like, we're supposed to be moving to Nigeria in like 4 weeks. Like, I have no idea. And we don't have the money for even one month's rent.
It's not like we're not planners. I mean, your dad or Matt researches everything that we could possibly research. And we try to do everything on wisdom. It's not like we're just those type of people that just randomly jump. We research and do everything that we can do on our own. But at the end of the day, there's only so much you can do.
Especially to go into somewhere like Africa. And still, what year is this? 2008?
2008.
Internet is not to where it is now. Like, technology, Facebook's just kind of getting started. It's not how it is now at all.
Yeah. So, like the day afterwards, I think the lady who she had visited in the apartment calls her or messages you.
Messages me, and says, "Can you guys take over our rent in our apartment? Our
British
businesses,
couple.
our businesses failed, and we now need to leave, and we would like to let you take over our rent." And I was like, Matt, yes, this is the greatest thing. And you asked the men.
I said, no,
how
I said, ask her how much. And she came back with how much it was. And I think it was like sort of $60,000, $70,000 for 8 months left
I'm
on the
like,
thing.
no way.
I'm sorry. I'd love to, but we can't do that.
And the reason why, were you able to do that on like a monthly installment, or was it, because typically in Nigeria, it's you have to pay X amount up front, correct?
Yeah. In fact, that place, you had to pay 2 years in advance. And that's what they had done. They're a British couple and they wanted to start a business in Nigeria. So they paid for the 2 years in advance. And he'd gone around and built all the furniture, all the drapes for the curtains and all.
Got the bedding, had the washing machine, iron, silverware, and everything.
It was a 4-bedroom place. He had the mosquito nets on the beds. Everything was there.
Walk in, turnkey.
Yeah, and he had said, he wanted it all up front and that kind of a thing, obviously. And so I just told her, I'm like, Julie, we can't do that. We can't say yes to that. We don't. There's no way we can. And so, she was upset a little bit, and I was too. But like a week later, he calls me direct, and he's like, "What do I have to do to get you in our place?" And I'm like, "Listen, I'm not trying to negotiate here and being a hard negotiator. The truth is, I'd love to go and be in your place. I just, we're self-funded. We don't have the resources." So I'm like, the answer to that question is, how low can you go? And he's like, well, how high can you go? I'm like, no, that's not what we're starting. We're starting for how low can you go? And so he's like, well, what can you do? And I said, listen, I'm not being rude. I'm just as where I'm at. I can do, I think the rent was something like $6,000 a month or something like that. I'm like, I can do $2,500 a month. And I didn't know where that money was going to come from. And then, and that was a huge stretch for me. And then I'm like, and then he's like, okay, I spent like $20,000, $30,000 furnishing the place out. He says, I'm willing to just walk away. And he's like, what can you do towards that? And I'm like, man, I don't know. Will you take 10 grand? So like for $12,500. And then I said, I have to do it monthly. And I'm like, and he's like, you know what? It's so crazy when I think about it now. I never signed a piece of paper. I have never shook the guy's hand. I never emailed. There was nothing in writing. I literally showed up to Nigeria and went and got the keys from the concierge guys, the security guys, opened the door and walked in. And I'm telling you, everything was in there. If you remember, I mean, all the silverware, everything. And here's the thing, Julie said, we're a planner. I'm a major planner, but we're just going so hard and so busy. And we just knew that God, it was just like an underlying confidence that God somehow is just going to make a way in the craziness of this risk-taking steps we're taking, that I hadn't even thought about the fact that it might take 3 months for the container to make it.
Yeah.
So I might have a place that was empty if it wasn't full and no furniture for 3 months. And the truth is God just went ahead and made a way, because I didn't know that it's almost impossible to start a business in Nigeria legally, because you have to have an address in order to do all the other points. But you can't get an address unless you get all the other points. Like it's like you have to somehow break the cycle that way. And it was like God provided this way where I didn't have to sign a contract or anything, but I had an address, I had everything I needed, and we were able to precipitate all the other things. And so I didn't have to break the law. I got everything done legally.
So to be clear, he discounted it from 70,000 to 12,000.
Well, to 12,000 for the first month, 10 for the stuff, and then 2.5 for the first month's rent. And then every month, we literally, as a team, by then we had a group of 20 Nigerian volunteers. Tokes was the kind of the point person for that. And so we were believing God every single month that I'd be able to minister someplace, or God would bring it in somehow. And that every month we'd have that $2,500.
Yeah. And at that same time, me and Jonathan started school there. Tell a little bit about that.
Well, that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, for real.
Well, I had gone during that time to the American school, and they had said, we will hire you and your wage will pay for your children's school wages. And
The tuition.
the tuition was
They were going to give a 50% discount as an employee, and then your wage was going to make up the
cover
other half.
rest. So I went in quite confidently, and I was like, this is paid for. I will never have to think about it. The kids' schooling will be paid for. And I got there and I went to the instruction days that you do before school starts. And I got in there and they said, "Oh, sorry, you're not considered an expat getting this job. You're considered a local hire. Local hires only get like a small wage."
You did not get the 50% reduction in tuition.
No.
You only got what you got paid for.
So I came back and I called Matt, and he was away at the time. And I said, we're not going to be able to do this because there's no way we can pay. The tuition was the most expensive. It's even more than university for just a semester.
It was $23,000 per child.
Okay, yeah.
And so I just went home and I called Matt and I just said, I don't think we're going to be able to do this. And I didn't want to homeschool you guys again because you had already homeschooled. I'm not a homeschool mom. Some missionaries are homeschool mothers, but I am not that mother. And I think you guys experienced that on our 80 days around the world.
Also, we're moving to Africa, to Nigeria, so we needed to be socialized with people our age or, different cultures and getting something to do on the weekends.
Well, and that's what I always loved about being a missionary, because when we were in England, you guys were part of our world. You went to school, you got to make friends, you were raised in that culture. And I wanted that for you. I wanted you to experience Nigeria and be part of the culture.
Yeah.
I didn't want to keep you at home. Some parents, want their children to be with them, but I wanted you guys to be out learning everything that you guys possibly could. So it was really important for you to go to that school, and I didn't know how it could work. So I called Matt, and somebody gave you the idea.
Yeah, I was in Egypt. I'd flown all night. I'd landed I was sweating like crazy in this place with no air conditioning that I was staying in for just a day until my meeting started. And she called me on the phone and she told me the situation, and she's like, what are we going to do? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. So I called a Nigerian executive of an oil corporation that we had met previously, ended up becoming one of our board members. And I knew that, he was someone that might be able to give us some wisdom. I called someone I had met when I was visiting a church in Lagos. He's a executive of an oil company. And I knew that his kids had gone to a school that was the American International School in Lagos. So I called him. I'm like, do you have any thoughts and advice? He said, you know what? He had moved from IBM to take his position at Shell Oil Corporation. And he said, I have 3 children, and the same exact thing happened to me. I got there, and I thought my tuition for my kids was paid for, and it wasn't. And his tuition was $30,000 per kid. Ooh. So $90,000 in school tuition each year, and he had to come out of his pocket. So he says, you know what you can do? You can ask them, will they allow you to make payments? He's like, they won't do that for most people, but they might for you.
So me being in the admissions office, I saw every single payment that came in. Most of the people that came to that school were funded by construction, funded by oil, funded by somebody else. And
embassies,
government, UN government. Your 2 tuitions were the only one that was personally funded. My payment to them for you was the only personal funded one and so we had such favor with them. So we were able to make those payments. God brought in the payments from supernatural sources, and we were able to keep on going to that school, which was such a blessing.
Because there wasn't that many options. There was 2 other international schools maybe, and then what are the other options?
Yeah,
there
wasn't,
isn't anything else other than that.
But even more than that, the Lord had spoken to us that that's the school and that you were to work there. That's not a very common thing that, that missionaries would go and then someone might work in a situation. I mean, some do, but you really knew you were supposed to be there. And there was a couple reasons for that. One is Julie brought a righteousness into a very liberal environment there, and she could kind of keep an eye out. But really a big one is when you met.
There was one lady who was the president of the, what do you call it whenever you're the parents association. And one day I was walking in there, and I said hi, and she had mentioned that her daughter's name was Zoe, and I said, "Oh, Zoe, the God Kind of Life." And she goes, "What? You know about Zoe, the God Kind of Life?" Come to find out, she was a Brother Hagin fanatic and knew every single book, and she had read that book, and immediately we became friends. And that lady, I call her our Lydia, because she ended up helping us to fund almost everything we did. She was a very wealthy Nigerian there in the community. She was over the association, and she literally was our Lydia for that whole entire time we were in Nigeria.
It's so funny because sometimes I'll look at you guys, and because I'm more like Dad, Jonathan's more like you, I'll be like, sometimes I just don't know how they work so well. But then I hear stuff like that, I'm like, thank God Mom was there. We need you.
Oh, yeah, because Dad would have never said hi as many times as I have.
No, I wouldn't. I would have walked right by.
No, but she literally helped us to fund a lot of the things that we did.
And not only that, but she was a gatherer, and she gathered people of influence to come to the Bible college. She's like, I'll be one of your first students. And she signed up a bunch of people. But here's an example of the influence of this lady. I'll give you 2 quick examples that show you the power of these relationships. Everything God does in the earth, He does through relationships. So because Julie obeyed and went and worked at the school, met this woman, then she became a student. So, at the end of that 8 months, so we stayed in that place for 8 months, that accommodation. But towards the end, we couldn't find another place, and we had the office in that apartment. And so you remember there
Tons of people coming to the house
all the
time.
Nigerians meeting in the house all the time. So, and eating our food and doing all the different things.
Just like the mouse that was in there.
Yeah, we had a mighty mouse
that
would not die.
Ate our entire washing machine. Hose pipe.
But so we're trying to get to a new place, and we were able to find, because we were looking for a place where the office was also based, it meant we had to be very centralized, and the centralized places were extremely expensive. And so she called me up one time. She said, I was praying, and I feel like that maybe we're supposed to help in some way. Would you like to do a meeting? I just got a building. I just renovated the space. I have a space. Would you like to start holding a meeting in that? And I'm like, actually, would you let us use it for an office? And she's like, oh, oh, that would be great. Let me talk to my husband. And she called back and she says, in fact, my husband's just finished out his office space and he's going to give you his office space. And I'm like, well, how much is it? And she's like, it's love terms. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. What do you mean love terms? Like, please just spell it out for me. She's like, it's free. And I'm like, free? And she's like, yes. And I'm like, so in the best place, in the best area, in a very localized area, we were able to move the office space there. What that meant is we were able to disassociate our personal accommodation from the office. So then we can move, because the office was central, we could then move to outside that area where we could find cheaper accommodation for us personally, which we've talked about before. So that was one way she did that. And, we provided for generator expenses and stuff like that. And we were there until the Bible college started. It started with 80 students. And then eventually we had 120 students. And then when we turned it over in 2018, it had 1,200 students of 4 campuses. And now it has over 8,000 students in 9 campuses. But so the other thing is the accommodation that we had found, we had looked everywhere for us personally. The team had looked everywhere, and over 2 days we visited like 30 properties, and there was nothing that worked. It was too expensive, and it wasn't good. And so one of the guys says, "Well, there is a property that came up where I live, but Weebles don't live in this area." And so I'm like, I'll look at anything, now. And I went and looked at it, and I'm like, man, this place is perfect. It's absolutely perfect, and it was like a third of the cost of anything else we'd looked at. But we still didn't have any of the money. You needed 2 years rent. So even a third of the cost times 2 years, it was crazy money. So this lady calls up again and she says, are you still looking for a place? And I'm like, you know what? I think I might have just found one. And she's like, how much is it? And I told her, and she's like, I'm sending my driver over with a check. Mm-hmm. So she sent over one check that covered 2 years rent. Oh. And that's the kind of thing, and I can tell you story after story after story that's just like that of God's provision through our whole time there. Thank you so much for hanging out with us, hearing some of the stories, and letting us pull back the curtain a little bit and invite you into our family adventures over these last 30 years. It's because of you that Clifton 40 has been able to do anything that we've done. Thank you so much.